Leaders, real life leaders.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode, and we have Richard Parker back for a part 2, and we are talking all about how to buy a business, and if you have one to sell, what are some things that you need to look for? And so we are going to go a little bit deeper and a little bit more advanced. If you didn't get a chance to listen to part 1, it was amazing. I suggest that you go back and listen. So Richard, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back and see you again.
Yeah. So one of the questions that someone had given us, and it was a really great question, you talked about in part 1, how you can take out when you're doing an evaluation, and I want you to kind of give a recap of that you can actually take out the salary of the owner and put it as part of the evaluation. You can subtract that part out. But what their question was is, let's say an owner is currently doing 3 jobs, and you know just as well as I do, a lot of CEOs are taking on 3 jobs. And let's say that CEO is making $100,000, but in order to replace that person, maybe it would cost $50,000 for person A, $50,000 per person B, and $50,000 per person C to cover all the jobs that they're doing. And then, so that in that case, it'd be $150,000. So how do you back out that salary if the owner is wearing so many hats and doing so many jobs?
Okay, it's a great question. So I'll answer the first part first, which is the quick recap of the valuation formula, if you will, which is the concept in small business purchases and sales is that the buyer is an owner-operator. In other words, the buyer is going to replace the function of the seller. And so you take the formula to come up with what number to multiply is the pre-tax earnings of the business off the tax return. Plus then you start adding back items. You add back the seller's salary, their perks, personal expenses, any one-time expenses, plus depreciation and interest. And then there's an offset if you have to replace equipment or what have you. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but certainly we can afterwards. But the idea is you come up with what we call an owner benefit number, which is assuming everything remains status quo after the buyer takes over the business. How much money will that new owner have to pay themselves a salary, service the debt, and grow the business? So that's how you come up with that owner benefit number, because it's predicated upon an owner-operated business. So that's the formula for owner benefits. And sometimes it's referred to as seller's discretionary earnings or seller's adjusted earnings. They should all mean the same, but that's conceptually is the buyer is replacing the seller. Now, in the case that you cite, which you're right, I mean, it's very common, jack of all trades, small businesses, owners doing everything. And so if there has to be people that are replaced, in this case, they wouldn't be replacing 3 people, they would be replacing 2, because the buyer will take over some of the functions of the owner. So let's talk about having to replace 2 people, theoretically. In this case, the seller's total compensation was $100,000. So that's getting put into the equation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are some offsets to that. You reduce that number, replacing equipment, etc. Here, in this particular case, you have to let's say that total number of owner benefits is $150,000, which includes the salary, the perks, the profit, etc. Now you say, well, we got to hire 2 people because 2 people that, the owner's doing the job of 3 and not effectively. And each one of those people are $50,000. So that's $100,000. So you take that owner benefit number of 150 and you reduce it by $100,000. So the net owner benefit number is actually $50,000.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. Let's talk for a minute about buying a distressed business. So maybe a distressed business where one that they're struggling to just make a profit. They're either kind of breaking even or making a little tiny bit per month, or even losing money each month. How would you advise a buyer in that situation? Have you ever helped someone with that one? Maybe they were filing bankruptcy, or if it was just a business that just they couldn't seemed to create momentum, but they had a ton of systems, a ton of processes in place. They just couldn't get it kind of off the ground.
So there's a couple things to look at here. One thing is there's been a proliferation of information all over the internet about this concept of buying distressed businesses, where you can acquire them for little money down, which, you know, is by no means the case frequently, right? However, that aside, it's critically important in these instances for individuals to look and say, why is this business distressed altogether? There's a reason why it's in the situation that it is. There's a reason why it's potentially in bankruptcy. Is it because of a lack of maybe just not having a good product or service? Maybe it's a bad owner. Maybe it's bad employees. Maybe if it's, you know, retail related, it's in the wrong location. So the first thing is to understand, why is this business in the shape that it is in? Now, with that, the second part is to say, okay, we know why this business is in the shape that it's in. Who is the ideal candidate to turn things around for this business? As a prospective buyer, if you're not that ideal candidate, you don't want to acquire that business, because you're acquiring a business that's a mess. You're going to be plugging the holes, putting out fires, trying to get traction. And if you're not ideally suited to turn that business around because of your expertise or specific experience in your past to turn that around, it is not a business you should consider purchasing, because it's not going to improve if you're the wrong person. It may even get worse. And so, you know, one of the things is, you know, I am a big believer by a good, rock solid business. You could take over Monday and get a paycheck on Friday. If you're not the right person to acquire that business, it's just going to be it's a never ending money pit. Like a garbage business, you could never buy it cheap enough. So the key thing in this is that those two parts. Why is it in the shape that it's in? Who is the ideal candidate to run that business? And am I that candidate?
I want you to expand on that, because I really think that is you deciding, am I the right person for this business? I feel like people don't talk about it enough, right? Like, there are certain people who are good from taking a business just right off the ground, like starting it, getting it going. And then there's like another leader where their giftedness is actually turning that businesses around. They can go in and go, oh, that's a problem, that's a problem, that's a problem. So how do you kind of identify, like, if you can name the different kinds of leaders and how someone can kind of go, which leader am I? Am I one that's kind of throw it off the ground? Am I the one to turn it around? Am I the one to just maintain status quo? That's another one. Like, I'm not going to be able to grow it, but I can just keep it going just like it is.
So it's a great question, because what happens to individuals, they confuse who they are and what they're really good at, what their ultimate skill set is. And there is a big difference between a startup leader and, let's call it a managing leader, someone who can keep managing something that's already in place and make some improvements. So the first thing that individuals have to get aligned with is, what is my greatest skill set? And people confuse experience and expertise. And I think we talked about this the last time. Just because you've worked in a particular sector doesn't mean you're an expert. It means that you have experience in the sector. It's what is it that you did specifically within certain industries or in certain jobs that is your greatest skill set. I think the common term people talk about it is their superpower. And it's really important, because what is your greatest skill set? So, because it requires a whole different set of skills from a startup to be a manager. Because in a startup, you have no idea what you're dealing with unless you've raised a ton of money. There's always problems as far as capital. Most businesses go out of business because of lack of capital. It's being very in tune with knowing what the market is. Is there a demand for this product? Is there a potential? What is the pathway to build a successful business? Have I done startups before? If you haven't done them before and you don't have a whole lot of money, you've got to do it on a small scale. Can this ever grow into something? And it's having the ability, I think, that as a startup individual to look and say, okay, we had all these plans at the beginning. These aren't working. The ability to know when to quit. And I don't mean quit throwing the towel with the business, but to pivot. Excuse me, to pivot, for example, this this way we thought we were going to get to the market or generate customers is what we thought. It's not working. We need to pivot. So it's someone who is really able to adapt to new situations, and that's a very important persona in a startup. As far as an ongoing business is concerned, it's again when it's matching your skill set to the right business. In the cases of the status quo, it's having a very good understanding of what drives the revenue and profits of the business. And whether it be sales, whether it be marketing, whether it be operations, whether it be manufacturing know-how, putting a team together, doing bids, organizing projects. I mean, whatever drives the revenue and profits of the business, is that something that I'm great at when I look at that as a buyer. And so irrespective of whether it's a startup, a business that's growing, or a business that you're going to keep status quo, as you referred to, it's again, matching your skill set to what that business needs to move forward, and not just move forward to, when you talk about status quo, you still need a skill set, even if your goal is to keep it status quo. I mean, that's up to the individual, but you still need a skill set to manage that, because if you're not the right person to keep those, everything going in the same way that it has been in the past, you'll start to decline. So really digging in to what drives the revenue and profits of the business, what drives the operations, what drives that business forward, that's critical during the evaluation process on an individual basis.
One of the things that I have thought about is this idea of a marketing company versus a prospecting company. And so one of the differences, like marketing and prospecting are both important approaches to getting customers and running sales. And so one of the things that I did when we first started our company is we spent so much money on marketing. So our company was spending anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000, and we were marketing for buyers and sellers in a real estate company. And then what we did was we then shifted into a more of a prospecting for agents. So we kind of changed who our client was, if that makes sense, right? Yes. So like first we were attracting buyers and sellers, and then we hired agents to work those buyers and sellers. Then we changed our company, and then we made it into more of a where all we were attracting was agents, and agents was our new customer. And then those people, it was their job to get the business in the door. And one of the things that I tell our agents is you have to decide, am I a marketing person or am I a prospecting person? Because the gifts of both of those are completely separate. And so for me, I know I'm a marketing person, meaning I like to run ads and then get in leads, and then we'll call those leads to try to convert them. Prospecting, being a prospecting-based company, would be more where you just start making cold calls, you're reaching out, you have salespeople that are, knocking on doors and doing that sort of thing. I'm not a prospecting type leader, if that makes sense. I'm more of the marketing side. So I want you to talk about how important that is in deciding whether you're the right fit for the leader of that company. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And it's testimony to what we just talked about related to in a startup, to having the fortitude and the brains to know when to pivot. I mean, you started out as, that the buyers and sellers of properties were your clients or targeted clients, and then realized, no, we're going to shift and we're going to go into prospecting and recruit new agents, and we'll leave it to them with some training and know-how, what have you, for them to do the prospecting or the marketing. Your target client shifted. And so that's exactly what we talked about earlier, is having the fortitude to know when to quit and to pivot, and have the brains to be able to do it, and also be able to execute the new plan, if you will. And so in businesses where people are buying an existing business, very often owners don't have, they don't make those pivots. They get into cruise control. They run a business for a long time. It's doing okay. Then they're good with what they've got, not necessarily going in every day to get bigger, better, and faster. And so when you go through the process of evaluating a business and you want to do it with good rationale, because it's very easy to be a Monday morning quarterback to sit back and say, here's all the great things that I could do with that business, right? But understanding who the current client is, because the whole reason to buy an existing business is you got a platform in place. It's already got revenue. It's already got customers. It's already got process, procedures, employees, infrastructure. Now, it may not be perfect, of course, and there's some changes that you may want to make, but the rock solid platform is there. And so having the ability to look at it and say, okay, here's what they are currently doing. And once you learn the business, you first have to make the connection that what they are currently doing makes sense for your skill set, because you don't want the business to evaporate. You may have some ideas, but you don't just throw everything out immediately, because you've paid for a solid platform to build upon. So the first thing is to make sure that I have the skills to run this business that I'm buying the same way the owner has, at least temporarily. My skill set matches, I can keep driving the sales and profits of that business. Then you look at it and say, tier two to that is saying, what's not perfect yet? What are things in this business that are not done right? Given my limited expertise as an outsider looking at this business, to say, well, they should be doing this related to the process, or the equipment is not efficient enough if they're at a manufacturing business, so we need to buy new equipment. Or, the sales and marketing team are misguided. They're doing marketing. We should be doing prospecting. In other words, similar to your example. And those are all wonderful things to think of. But until you get immersed in the business and learn that business, you can't make those decisions as an outsider. You learned that in your example by doing it. You said, okay, I love the marketing, we're good at that, but it's actually not the best way to build this business. And it's only through know-how and experience being immersed in it every day that you were able to make that decision. So it may evolve, but you can't take away from this concept. The whole concept of buying an existing business is because you have the platform in place. And so you want to learn it, get yourself immersed, and then you can make appropriate changes if they make sense.
Let's talk about how to know if your business is like the one that you're buying. If the business is maybe like kind of a taxi cab or a blockbuster company. And one of the things that we say when we're promoting our company is we say things like, Netflix took over Blockbuster, Uber took over taxi cabs, and we want to take over traditional brick and mortar real estate, right? Because all of our locations are virtual. And we also use, in our company, we use Regis and we use a co-working space. So we're in 20 states. And so for us, what we used to do is when we opened up in Charlotte, North Carolina was one of our first out-of-state locations. And, we did a lease, and then we had to go down there and put all this furniture. And it was slow growth, slow growth, slow growth. And then we were like, okay, this is not working. In order for us to be able to scale into 20 states and be able to grow, we need to just use these co-working spaces, because boom, we're on a month-to-month lease. I don't have to get any furniture. I have my own office. It's month-to-month. And so that's why we're saying, hey, we're creating things that are like Netflix and like Uber. Uber doesn't own any of its cabs, right?
Right.
So when you're looking at businesses and kind of saying, okay, let's look at this business and decide, is it Uber and is it Netflix, or are they running things on the old model? What kind of advice do you give to people when it comes to that?
It happens quite frequently, and it's a great example. And when you look at it, because very often, businesses after a certain amount of time, they get into, mentioned it earlier, cruise control. The owners and the staff, they just come in every day and they keep repeating the same thing, and they have an element of loyalty amongst their client base, and they're going to get a certain amount of business. And it's amazing how many times you look at businesses and you look at their financials, and year after year, they're within a couple of percent of each other, and they just get comfortable with that. And so what I like to look at is, what are competitors doing? Number one. are there any competitors that are 800-pound gorillas in the space that are doing something differently? Because there's a reason, every big business started out as a small business. So are there any big companies in my space that are doing things differently? And why are they doing $25 million a year and I'm doing $1.5 million? Like, what are we doing differently? Even though we're in the same business, there's things that we are doing differently. So I want to understand that. I also want to understand is it reasonable to think that there is the opportunity to grow this business significantly? And very often a different set of eyes coming into a place can achieve that. Where I have found there to be incredible resource, and again, we're talking about buying an existing business. One of the areas that I have found to be an incredible resource for a new owner coming into a business is the staff itself. Because very often they are stymied. They come in, it's like rote, just doing the same stuff every day, over and over and over, rinse, repeat, over and over again, rinse, repeat, doing the same thing. They're not empowered. They're not given an opportunity to explode their area that they're working on. Very often the staff has some horrific ideas of things they could do because they know their departments well, and the owner is just not empowering them to lead the charge. So many of the small businesses are micromanaged. So I look at the competition as an 800-pound gorilla. The industry itself, meaning, is there a demand in place to really expand this business? And I want to understand the caliber of the employees, and I want to empower them. I want to hear their thoughts. I want to hear them tell me, how can I make your job easier? What is it? What are the tools that you need? What do you think we can do to grow this business? Because it's amazing if you go into the sales or the marketing department or the operations department, whether it's someone who's in the warehouse, they can be telling you certain things like, we don't pack the orders in an efficient manner, or we don't pack them properly, or the inventory is all over the warehouse. And so when I go to pack an order, I have to start going through each aisle to see where everything is, versus having a proper system that when I get the packing slip to pick an order, it should tell me what bin that product is in, so I can pack it up and pick the order and pack it up quickly. Things as simple as that. Or sales and marketing team saying, every time, the owner never wants to budge on price. I have clients who with a small discount or a little year-end rebate will give us more business. The owner never wants to budge. Whatever the case may be, some of the greatest ideas come from the employees. They're on the front lines. They know what's going on, and they want to share that, and people want to feel part of the process. So that's the way I dig into trying to understand, where are there really these great growth opportunities.
Yeah, I was thinking about, with one of the reasons that Blockbuster failed with its leadership, because, it had a well-oiled operational machine, but what they did wrong is they were poorly suited to let new information in, meaning, okay, we're just going to keep doing things the exact same way that we've always done it. We're going to create a well-oiled machine, but not looking at, okay, what does the customer want? And figuring out, you're really focused on getting entertainment to the customer, and what is the easiest way to get it to the customer. And I feel like Netflix did that, and they were not willing to let new, come with the times, if you will.
Oh no, and it's very common. It's like the not invented here syndrome. They're just so full of themselves. They've got something that's making money. They think it'll last forever, and they're not open-minded to new ideas. And marketing, you're very well versed in marketing. It's not very difficult. It's, who are your customers? What do they want? And how do I get it to them at a price that they're going to pay for it? That's it. And if you're not speaking to your customers, if you're not on the front lines, asking them what they want and understanding what they want, Blockbuster had a fantastic model for a very long period of time, but you've even looked at Netflix. Netflix started out by mailing CDs. I mean, their original concept was, what do we need all these stores for with all this huge infrastructure and all these titles, and they're not in stock, and then we have to find people with late fees. This is like a whole buffet of infrastructure that we're up against in Blockbuster. I mean, don't get me wrong, I used to love going on Friday nights with my kids when they were younger to Blockbuster. Everyone could pick a movie. They had the greatest snacks ever. And so you spent an hour just picking out a movie because the experience at a Blockbuster store, for me anyways, and my kids, it was always a blast, right? But that, Netflix looked at that and said, hey, we don't need all this nonsense. We don't need all this infrastructure. We don't need these stores that are, 12,000 or 8,000 or 6,000 square feet, because that was somewhat of their footprint, laying out all these movies. You've got people at the front, workers at the front, the guy sitting there picking his nose, not putting the new releases out. I mean, it's just a mess. Why don't we just take the same product, which is, we understand, here's what the customers want. They want the movie. Okay. Yeah, the snacks are great and the experience is great, but they went there to get a movie. They didn't go there to waste an hour. They didn't go there to buy snacks. They went there to get a movie. So let's get them the movie in a real easy way. We'll mail it to them. Okay. And we'll send them the CD, and then we'll give them some time to send it back. They can watch it if they have a couple of extra days. So there's no penalty. It's only after a week or whatever versus Blockbuster's 48 hours. So they improved the Blockbuster model infinitely, right? But they took it even further and said, hey, we don't even have to mail these anymore. We could do this by streaming. And so all they did was they took the Blockbuster model, because the thing that was in place was this massive consumer base that wanted to watch movies. So how do we deliver those movies to these individuals in the most efficient manner possible? So they went from, Blockbuster had its model to, we'll improve upon that a little bit and send the CDs, so we'll just stream it and people can press a button at any moment in time they think they want to watch a movie, and boom, they can watch a Netflix movie. So they just kept, there was a never-ending pursuit of improvement.
I love that.
Of a model. But they never took their eyes off what the customer wants. They just made it all that much better. Now, you look at it, now you don't even think about it. It's not like you don't sit down and pick a Netflix movie and say, geez, this movie's good, but it would be so much better if we had an opportunity to buy snacks. No one even thinks about that. Right? Yeah. They just want to watch the movie.
Well, this has been amazing. Tell listeners where they can find you and where they can follow you.
richardparker.com is our website. We have tons of free resources, articles. Our main course that we teach people how to buy business, called How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price, is available there as well, that people can investigate. But there's so much information, and anybody who has any interest in entrepreneurship and wants to learn about buying businesses, you can get lost in a wealth of resources and helpful information. So it's richardparker.com.
Awesome. Well, you guys stay tuned. We've got another episode coming up in just a few. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real Life Leadership. If you'd like to get the show notes or access more resources, log on to reallifeleaders.com/podcast to get the show notes from this episode and any other resources we might have mentioned. And also, we'd love to hear from you. Be sure to review or rate this podcast on Apple Podcasts to help spread the word. And if you have any leadership questions you want answered, email podcast@reallifeleaders.com.